Միկրոֆոն միացնել պետք է, թե միացրած է։
Բարև ձեզ հարգելի գործընկերներ, շնորհակալություն մեր հրավերը ընդունելու համար։ Հրաֆինանսավորման տոկոսադրույքը բարձրացվել է մինչև 9.25%, Մարտին Գալստյանի ներկայացնում հաղորդագրությունը, որից հետո կարող եք հարցեր
Բարև ձեզ։ 2022 թվականի մարտի 15-ին կենտրոնական բանկի խորհուրդը որոշեց բարձրացնել վերաֆինանսավորման տոկոսադրույքը 1.25%, սահմանելով 9.25%։
Setting it at
2022 թվականի փետրվարին եւ 12 ամսյա եւ բնականոն գնաճերը կբկան inflation համահունչ նվազել են
in line with the expectations and projections of the Central Bank of Armenia, totaling 6.5 and 6.4% respectively. In the external sector, in the context of the Russian-Ukrainian military conflict, various sanctions have been imposed upon Russia's economy. As a result, a significant increase in financial market volatility and uncertainty about economic prospects was observed.
Ամնում եւ Եվրոպայում ընթացիկ տարում տնտեսական աճի
The slowdown of economic growth is expected this year, and the economic decline is expected in Russia. At the same time, the disruption of the reviewed supply chains in the international commodity and food markets have caused a significant increase in prices. This is reflected in the formation of a higher than expected inflationary environment in partner countries. As a result, a mainly inflationary impact is expected on the Armenian economy from the external sector.
Ռուսաստանի դեմ կիրառված պատժամիջոցների ազդեցությունը Հայաստանի տնտեսությանը վրա կարտահայտվի տնտեսական աճի
economic growth in Armenia.
Սա առավելապես տեղի կունենա արդյունաբերության ճյուղի անկման հաշվին։ Ամբողջական պահանջարկի վերականգնի դրամական փոխանցումների նվազման եւ արտաքին պահանջարկի թուլացման ազդեցությունները։ Զբոսաշրջության ոլորտից սպասվում է դրական նպաստ։ Տարածաշրջանի աշխարհաքաղաքական ռիսկերի ավելացումը եւ բարձր
and high uncertainty have led to increased volatility in the Armenian financial markets and bigger risk premium. As a consequence, the existing uncertainties were reflected in the inflation dynamics and inflation expectations as well. In view of the above, the board of the CBA judges it appropriate to increase the refinancing rate by a relatively large step. The board evaluates that amid the economic outlook uncertainties provided the risks of rising inflation expectations persist, the need for possible tightening of monetary conditions in the near future will be considered as well. Due to this policy actions, 12-month inflation will gradually decrease and reach the target of 4% in the forecast horizon. The board of the central bank considers that as a result of geopolitical developments, the uncertainty in terms of macroeconomic perspective has significantly expanded. At the same time, the risks of inflation deviation from the projected trajectory are mainly balanced. Should the risk materialize in any direction, the board stands ready to respond accordingly in fulfillment of the price stability objective. Thank you for your attention.
Արկագործակալություն ինչքան է հիմա կենտրոնական բանկի կանխատեսումը հնայի վերաբերյալ այսպիսի հարց միջազգային կառույցների կամ պետությունների կողմից ճնշում գործադրվում է արդյոք ԿԲ-ի վրա Ռուսաստանի դեմ ֆինանսաբանկային պատժամիջոցներին միանալու համատեքստում ևս մի հարց թույլտվությամբ հայկական բանկերը խնդիրներ ունեն վիզա, Mastercard
Are Armenian banks encounter any problems with Visa, MasterCard or other payment systems? If yes, what are those objectives and what are the proposed solutions? Picking up with the same question, does the CBA intend to certify any other payment systems, for example, UniPay? Can the banks individually do this on their own? We know they're servicing these, but do not issue cards. And does Armenia need it at all to begin with? Thank you. We'll try to take the questions in succession. With your permission, before answering the questions, I would like to thank our team on your behalf as well, I believe, because today's conversation would not have been possible had our team been professionals and dedicated to the extent that it is. We are able to report statistics in total uncertainty. Talking about something in digits, in total uncertainty, if you want my opinion, is heroic as of today. So I believe once you look at the slides, you will be able to evaluate the work done. As for your question on economic growth, you see on this slide that our projections instead of 5.3 have been reduced to 1.6. As I mentioned in the press release, this is mainly determined by industrial developments in the industry. If someone has a 4G turned on, please turn it off and join the Wi-Fi of the central bank. Thank you. You see that there is certain decline in the industry. We estimate that the industry should have grown by 1.6 for 2022, whereas in view of the new developments, we see that there are certain challenges in the mining, in the processing industry. Minus 4.7 is the growth. There is a certain decline in construction as well. You will see that if you look at the graph on the left-hand side, you see that the only one with a certain positive increase compared to our projections is agriculture. As for your second question as to whether there are any pressures exercised upon us, essentially our approach is as follows. We will monitor the regime of international sanctions. We have certain experience already of doing that. I think the main purpose of our mission today is to keep the Armenian financial system immune. Third question. Visa Master part. We have one case with the issue since the bank itself is in the sanctions list. In all other cases, there's no issue whatsoever. Both systems are naturally serviced by all remaining banks in Armenia. As for UnionPay, at this point, it's hard for me to answer specifically because there is a session of the If I'm not mistaken, our AGBA bank has an agreement whether the cards operate in Armenia or not. We will inform you in writing subsequently. Sputnik then 168.
Մի բան եմ ուզում տնտեսական աճի կանխատեսման հետ կապված ավելացնել հնայի աճը, երբ որ մենք կանխատեսել ենք, մենք ըստեյության հարկաբյուջետային քաղաքականությունը վերցրել ենք այն, ինչ որ ենթադրվում էր մինչև շոկը, հետևաբար կախված նաև թե դա ինչպես կփոխվի, այսինքն օրինակ հարկաբյուջետային քաղաքականությունը շոկի արդյունքում կլինի ավելի խթանող կամ հակառակը, նույն կերպ նաև դա կարտացոլվի հնայի մեջ, ուզում եմ շեշտադրել, որ այս հնայի կանխատեսման մեջ հարկաբյուջետային քաղաքականությունը
emphasize that we have not yet factored in fiscal policy changes in this projection of the GDP.
Շնորհակալություն։ Բանկերը, մի շարք բանկեր հաղորդագրություն են տարածել, զգուշացնելով չօգտվել այդ սանկցիաների ներքո հայտնված ռուսական բանկերից, որպես միջնորդ բանկ ամեն դոլարով փոխանցումներ կատարելիս, Ազգայբանկը եւ այլ բանկեր։ Արդյոք մեծ է, որքան է, այսինքն այդ գործակների տեսակարար կշիռը ընդհանուր դոլարի փոխանցումների մեջ, այսինքն կամ գոնե դրանք էական են թե ոչ, եւ եթե շնորհ բանկը տեղափոխվում է այլ դեպի այլ բանկ կամ այլ յուրիսդիկցիա, դա արդյոք այդ տրանզակցիոն ծախքերը բարձրացնում է, կախված ձեռնարկությունների վճարունակության հետ, արդյոք ունեք որևէ գնահատական, թե արտանող ձեռնարկությունները դեպի Ռուսաստան, եթե նրանք ստանան այդ պայմանագրային եկամուտները կամ հասույթը վաճառքներից Ռուսաստանում ռուսական ռուբլով եւ դրամային արտադրությամբ նրանց հասույթը նվազի, արդյոք նրանք կարող են խնդիրներ որպես վարկառող։
Քանի որ մենք բացառիկ իրավիճակում ենք դրամավարկայինով ոնց որ թե չենք սահմանափակվել, ոնց որ փորձեմ հակիրճ նաեւ անդրադառնալ ձեր այդ հարցերին, բանկերի տրանզակցիոն ծախսերի հետ կապված մենք մեր վերջին հանդիպումից հետո, երբ որ արդեն խոսակցություններ կար որոշակի լարվածության կամ ինչ-որ հնարավոր պատժամիջոցների մասին, մենք մեր բանկային համակարգի հետ որոշակի տնային աշխատանքներ ենք իրականացնում, որպեսզի դիվերսիֆիկացնենք բանկային համակարգի գիտակցային հաշիվների հնարավոր ցանկություններ կան։ Այս պայմանությամբ այդ աշխատանքները ևս շարունակվում են, ուստի մեր ակնկալիքը նա է, որ ի վերջո մենք դիվերսիֆիկացնել բանկային համակարգի գիտակցային հաշիվները այն
accounts of our banking system to the extent that there will be no significant increase in transactional costs. As for our exporters to the Russian Federation, their behavior or accounts receivable and the impact on their solvency, at this point this would require some micro-analysis. At this point in time I will not claim that we are fully in control of the situation. It's quite a patchwork. There are companies that have contracts designated in US dollars, but in their subsequent contracts they are expected to be in Russian rubles. There are companies that at this point expect to be paid in Russian rubles, and naturally this will have a significant impact. The ruble-dollar or ruble-dram exchange will significantly impact them as of the point of transaction. And there are companies who negotiate with suppliers to just get their receivables, because there are some issues there as well. We need to understand the overall risk or exposure of the banking sector to this type of companies, and after certain analysis we'll be able to summarize. I cannot tell you about the risks accumulated at this point, but total weight of exports to Russia is $850 million. Only part of it is agricultural produce. There is also processing industries who do not have serious impediments in servicing their debt. So once we do this analysis, we'll share the findings with you, understanding the degree of risk. Do you have analysis or observations about whether their suppliers have hiked the prices in rubles to catch up with the decline of ruble vis-a-vis the dollar? Unfortunately, Aramjan, at this point, the uncertainty is so high that everyone is still on standby, waiting to see when this confrontation active phase will be over, after which new economic realities will settle and new negotiations will therefore commence. Let me fill in, as the governor mentioned, renegotiating is what exporters are actively engaged in. As for importers, there is less of uncertainty because the main goods imported are in dollars, and there is significantly less uncertainty here, which is why the main question is how will our exporters renegotiate. With importers there's far less issues. 168 hours. Mr. Galdstyan, I would like to say whether there is a danger of forex flight, and if yes, will the central bank impose any restrictions on acquiring hard currency? And the next question today, in lawyer Rafi Aslanyan disseminated news about Econom Bank affiliated with Khachatur Sukiasyan refusing to return long-term deposits or pay interest on citizens in their dollar deposits. Do you see an issue there, and does central bank have anything to do here? As for flight of forex and restrictions on it, there is no need for it at this point. I know there are countries that have imposed certain restrictions on taking cash forex out. Our partners in the banking system have already offered certain solutions to this, but for central bank to impose any directives to regulate the situation, I don't see the need for this at this point in time. As for the article you referred to, a Facebook publication, frankly, I'm not aware of it. We will peruse it, and if there would be a need to interfere, we'll consider. Let me take this with a pinch of salt, that it is possible in the Republic of Armenia for any bank not to return the deposits of the people. Mr. Movdisyan. Thank you, Mr. Gallistyan. Several questions. During the previous press conference, a question was asked whether disconnecting Russia from SWIFT will have any consequences. You said brief and grave, without spelling it out. Now, the majority of Russian banks are 70% are under sanctions, and the same amount are disconnected from SWIFT. There are certain banks that still are connected. So most of Armenian banks are connected with the external world through Russian banks. What are the issues that Armenian banks encounter in this respect, whether they have it or not? If I'm not mistaken, you mentioned that VTB Bank is in the sanctions list. You didn't name it, but still. They have an issue with Visa cards, if I'm not mistaken. There was a publication with respect to the Terut mine, which also have a problem, because this is the bank that disposes of it. So the question is, let me not say jeopardized, but will the Russians' investments in Armenia suffer as a result, and how will the Armenian economy overall bear the impact? Because there are major systemic enterprises in Armenia with Russian investment, with the rail, Southern Railway, Armenal, and you name it. What are the expectations of the central bank in this respect? And the last question. Foreign nationals, in particular Russian citizens that move to Armenia, have an issue with setting up bank accounts. They approach the banks, they are on waiting list, turned down more often than not. What is the reason? Is this because of the sanctions? About the SWIFT system, during our previous press conference, I said grave, but we've done some work in the meantime, expecting certain developments, and I believe it was right that we were proactive here. At this point, luckily, the banking system of the Republic of Armenia has no issues with external payments. Both our banks and ourselves are actively working in setting up corresponding account relations with new banks to serve the businesses as well as possible. As for specifically VTB Bank, we have circulated a press release, and we state there in the umpteenth time that the bank is pretty healthy, is under constant supervision by the central bank. There are some momentary issues with the bank's cards. They are exogenous, outside of our control, but in any case, we have attempting to find certain solutions together with the bank with this respect as well, and shortly these solutions shall be put in place. As for major investments, I can say that by the end of the day, at this point in time, according to information I have access to, many companies that have major investments in Armenia continue to operate normally. Majority of them in the energy sector or the Southern Railway, according to the information that we have, do not operate in the context of sanctions in the Republic of Armenia. They may be deprived of technologies. Well, we keep the finger on the pulse of the development. 5.3 down to 1.6 reduction of the economic growth forecast is determined by the fact that, according to our estimates, hold on, I'll bring up the chart. You see the decline in the Russian economy. Our estimate is about 6%. The red line in the right-hand side. So it does impact us significantly. So excluding that, the Russian signals will not affect us, would be stretching it, but we have to calmly work to maximally minimize the impact on our economy. And what was the third question? Russian citizens setting up accounts here in Armenia. In any banking system, even irrespective of the sanctions on this conflict, the requirements for non-residents are more rigid than those for residents. In this situation, the approach of the banks is pretty conservative and appropriate, if you want my opinion, because the banks onboard new clients through due process, which means essentially the banks do the due diligence of their new clients, trying as a rule to understand whether these are transit customers or the center of their economic interest would be in Armenia. If it's the second option, that is, the clients are included, onboarded into the Armenian banking system because their economic center of interest moves to Armenia, then there is no issue. If the bank estimates that the Armenian banking system shall be used as a transit hub for transactions, then of course the banks respond upon their discretion. At this point, if I'm not mistaken, 6,500 non-residents have already entered the Armenian banking system. I had a private meeting over what period? Within the last 2 weeks, since March 2 to this day. Let me tell you of a private situation. A major international company's head I had a meeting with, who set up an account in one of our banks right on the eve of our meeting, and the person assured me that such service had yet to be encountered by him. He has worked in many countries of the world and never encountered such a high level of service. So when you mentioned one side of the story, we have to acknowledge that we have high quality services as well. Arm info. I apologize, I will speak in Russian. What will the development be? We know that most of the funds arrive here from Russia. What are your estimates about that? And the second question about the raising the refinancing rate. Last year the lending has slowed down. Don't you think that increasing the refinancing rate will exacerbate the situation with lending? But I will answer in Armenian anyway. As for the remittances, according to our estimates, through this year we will have a certain decline in remittances, very preliminarily about 20% of a decline in remittances. As for volume of lending in view of increased refinancing rate, the biggest factor that affects lending is the total uncertainty, if you want my opinion. Once we get out of this stage, and for businesses and banks, development prospects will become more certain, the conflict unfolding, the economy developing, then I believe the central bank's refinancing rate increase, which will contribute to regulating the inflationary environment in the country, will be viewed by investors as a far more positive step. People will invest based on our macroeconomic policy. Civic AM. Mr. Galastian, since the board of ZBA has decided to increase by 1.25 percentage points the refinancing rate, will this contribute to possibly expected restriction of price hikes, or will it impact the already more expensive prices? And since you mentioned that the positive impact is expected in the tourism, some economists still deny that there will be positive trends in the tourism. Could you expand on it? Thank you. With your permission, I will answer somewhat in retrospect. You may recall that throughout 2020, when in the Republic of Armenia in December, inflation was 1.6, the central bank increased by 1 percentage point the refinancing rate, because in our assessment we were expecting that in the Republic of Armenia there will be an inflationary environment through 21. Through you, we clearly communicated this message to the public that 21 will be inflationary. The central bank, with its toolkit, contributed to the midterm inflation returning to the target. Over a year, the inflation grew. In December of 21, it already reached 9.6%. 9.6. In December, it went down to 7.7. In February, we already had 6.5% of an inflation, which means that we did our work well in managing inflationary expectations and inflation. As of end of February, had it not been for this conflict and its ancillary inflationary phenomena, and we're responding to this anyway, had we ruled all this out, we would see that Armenia is in the team of exceptional countries where inflation in the month of February had a trend of reduction. Starting end of the year, the inflation was going down, which is something we communicated about. And our expectation from the perspective of our policy was that by the end of 22 we should have gotten close to our target. Since we now have what we have, we naturally cannot remain impartial, because these developments will impact the inflationary background and expectations. At this point in time, we decided to focus all of our actions on the future. We do not respond to the current situations. What we do today is aiming at restraining future inflation. Continuing with this idea, let me add one more thing. There is another important factor that affected the decision. It's the risk premium increase. I will try to show it on the chart. On the left-hand side, the sovereign risk premium. Before the conflict, it was about 300 basis points. At this point, not only our, but almost in every country in the region, it went up to 600 basis points. In lay terms, it means investors, in order to invest in this jurisdiction, will ask for 300 additional basis points, 3% additional return on investment. This affects our neutral interest rate, and through the neutral interest rate we have tools to specifically respond and cover that which the markets expect from us. All of our actions are aiming at the future and not respond to the present. Could you remind me? Yes, the tourism. In our estimates, through this year there will be certain rebound of tourism because of several factors. One factor is the mitigation of the COVID situation. Scenario development, considering the uncertainty, could be diverse also depending on the course of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. There may be different incarnations. We expect that we'll have certain increase over last year's indicators in tourism. What's the difference? No mic, no translation. Please turn on your mic. Is it a growth on the background of a negative? Do you mean we will reach the indicators of 2019? No. But we expect more than in 21, yes. In 21, we also have reiterated, and our de facto indicators have demonstrated that we had a rebound more than expected in tourism through 21. This year, we expect this to continue by the same token. Like the governor mentioned, there could be different scenarios, much more positives and far more negatives, less likely so. Let me fill in about the remittances. I apologize. We expect 20% decline in the remittances, but we need to evaluate the economic fallout so that we do not overestimate this or not take it as in the past. We already mentioned that the overall economic effect of remittances have reduced and have less weight in the GDP, and especially the share of remittances from Russia has shrunk anyway. In the past, give or take, the remittances were 10-15% in the GDP. Now it's 7-8%, and the weight of Russian remittances in the past was 80%. Now it's 40% in the total. This means that this transfer channel has reduced on the effect of our economy. Does FATF add new requirements in view on verifying transactions with Russia or processing transactions with Russia? Does it add time or costs to the banks? And as for foreign trade difficulties, in crises like this, as it happened in 2020, public support is steered towards short-term liquidity, assurance of the enterprises. They get working capital augmentation to maintain incessant operations. Is there any discussion underway with the government in order to release such funding to the businesses like it was done under certain projects in 2020? As for legal persons and business deposits, if I'm not mistaken, even before this Russian-Ukrainian conflict, the enterprises increase their deposits. Do you think this will continue according to your analysis, or is there a risk that, especially in this uncertainty, the businesses shall no longer invest their working capital in business, but simply keep them in the banks outside of the economy? And one more question, with your permission. Apart from this situation, refinance rate increase is expected in the USA, and the Fed will have a session today. Is it possible, in view of such an increase, there will be an outflow of non-resident deposits who keep forex deposits in our banks? If yes, what could be the consequences? Thank you for a multifaceted. Let's start with FAT. According to information I have access to, no standard or anything else has changed. As for the second question about foreign trade, enterprises and possible support programs, these discussions I believe are underway, but they will follow the analysis you referred to in your first question. This will not be ubiquitous like it was during the pandemic. It will be more targeted, addressing the companies that may possibly suffer as a result of Russian-Ukrainian conflict as exporters, whether the businesses will keep their funds in the banks without new investment projects. That's quite possible a scenario, because essentially business likes peace and tranquility rather than uncertainty. So I would not even venture to say something on behalf of businesses. And last but not least, the Fed increasing the rate possibly and the response there too. The most probable scenario will be 0.26% increase today. We already increased by 1.25. So when I was telling you about the risk premium, as a rule, whenever such an unrest takes place anywhere, there arises what they call flight to quality. We do expect this as, I wouldn't say that we're expecting this as an extreme possible risk. We believe that investors that are in this region, and particularly in Armenia, are pretty well compensated against the risks that they assume. The returns are sufficient for them to feel compensated against the risks they assume in investing in Armenia. Therefore, we do not expect major flight of capital out of Armenia. Let me add here, as the governor mentioned in our program and our decisions, regardless, we factor in all of these factors, including the increase in US refinancing rate. All ancillary consequences are already included in our projections. And let me emphasize one more thing. It's very important in this background to look at the degree of trust and confidence of the investors in the banking financial systems of countries, and that's a reputation of their monetary and fiscal policies. So when Mr. Galastian told you how we responded to the inflation, this story has been commended by whoever is looking at our macroeconomic stability. So in the context of these discussions, they should be looked at as a serious factor, not considering all countries equal in this respect. Mr. Galastian, a question is in a geopolitical context because of the situation. When they ask international players or major politicians, they all say that after this conflict, the world will no longer be the same as before. What are the expectations in the financial world? Will there be global shifts, or what if? Some people speak about the new Iron Curtain. What will be the global major impact on the financial world, and if yes, what? A premise that is actively circulating with respect to the financial world is as follows. An unprecedented step was taken. The reserves of a major country like Russia were frozen, essentially. If you look, the financial experts are asking this question, whether assets in US dollars or the US dollars will not continue to be viewed by other countries as the most safe and secure place to keep their assets. I believe the tectonic shifts in the financial system will not happen, yet the new trends emerging in the financial system will pertain rather than to geopolitical developments, they will rather be focusing on digitization, comfort. As for the possible impact of geopolitical developments on the financial systems, I believe we'll have to live and see as to what will transpire, especially at least after the end of the active phase of this confrontation. The public is interested in the following. The margin between the buy and sell is now 20% for rubles, 10% for dollars. Is it this volatility associated risk, or the banks are just doing business? There has not been such volatility in rubles up to 1 dram. I don't want to compare it with the supply demand. Is it just going after profits, or is it evaluating the risks? The balance between buy and sell of forex in the Republic of Armenia usually is very moderate and small, this margin in Armenia. So to assume that this is the abuse of market position in this situation would not be appropriate. As for the spread of this margin, we have to understand that it would be very difficult to understand at this point, find a single exchange rate in Russia. At this point in the financial market, there are lots of discussions, various exchange rates at the exchanges for cash, non-cash transactions, which of course troubles financial agents, including banks. They're trying to hedge their potential risks in as much as possible to restrain volatility without having adequate toolkits to trade in derivatives or other instruments with Russia. The only possibility they have is to have a larger spread than historically it was in place. We'll understand that in these conditions of uncertainty and volatility, if the spread is low, you acquire an asset at X valuation. Over a single day, it could fall 20% and you incur losses. So the financial agents, I think, take these decisions based on the rationale I mentioned. As for the position of the central bank, we think that the market shall regulate this itself. Doing it through imperative regulation will result in far worse consequences like the black market. So reflecting the market pricing is still a priority. Concurrent with reduced risks, the situation will fix itself. As for the ruble spread, whenever the buy and sell spread of an asset widens like this means there is uncertainty about its price. As Mr. Galastian mentioned, at this point in Russia, there is quite a lot of uncertainty about cash non-cash pricing of ruble and big spreads. Being the source of shocks, Russia, you cannot expect that Armenia will have smaller spreads than in Russia itself. It's the reflection of the same uncertainty in the Republic of Armenia rather than the decision by economic agents here in Armenia. A question was already asked about the possible risk of flight of forex. You mentioned that you do not see a need to take specific steps about this, but you mentioned that the banks have already done certain things. What is it that the banks did? What did you refer to? What are the banks doing now? And about Ukrainian call about the mirror cards, what's the central bank position on this? There is this artificial noise, which I do not see the need of about mere cards. The central bank continues its regular operations. As for your first question as to what the banks are doing and what's the position of the central bank, we think that there is no need to apply administrative leverage at this point. The banks, if I'm not mistaken, a week after the hostilities broke out, the banks decided to restrict the possibility of cashing in non-resident cards, which was removed, if I'm not mistaken, this restriction. And a decision was taken also about if Russian non-residents were opening accounts to somehow control the influx of rubles. They were concerned that there could be an influx of rubles to Armenia, be converted into cash forex, and then flee Armenia. But I think the banks were quite reasonable and balanced in their response to this. Today's situation is such that we even we do not do several days of forecast, we do it on a daily basis. The uncertainty is such that we need to do it on a daily, hourly basis, follow the developments.
Եթե կարելի իհարկե դրամավարկային քաղաքականությունը նվիրված է հանդիպումը, բայց ունեք
This is on monetary policy, but a fiscal question nevertheless, a risk assessment, if you will find it appropriate. Budget, revenue collection or shortfall, do you see any risks? You mentioned about 6,500 non-resident accounts were opened within the last 2 weeks or 10 days? Since March 2. As for fiscal accounts, in our baseline scenario, we include the information we have access to. We remain within the fiscal framework that the government has prescribed. As for future developments, what would be the fiscal response? We already have agreed today with the Ministry of Finance and our colleagues in the government to sit down together and discuss this. At this point in time, I would not be able to share anything else with you. With your permission, you shifted the accent to fiscal risks in the budget program for 22. There is 70 billion drams additional buffer expenditures envisaged, which the government has set aside for unprecedented situation. We think that this scenario fully fits within this provision. As for the discussion with the partners in the government, Mr. Gallstian already mentioned. So rethinking the expenditures with respect to these risks and having additional effects on the economy, these are issues that are not on the agenda today. Did you refer to the reserve fund? 67 billion. When I mentioned that the fiscal policy assumptions have not changed, to illustrate it with an example, you said that during coronavirus there were support projects and programs, and you asked whether producers may expect something similar this time. Our main message is that in this 1.6% that is not reflected because we still do not have information as to what will transpire. It's highly likely that the government will adjust fiscal monetary policies. If there is incentives, that will be reflected in the GDP projections. This is quite possible, naturally, not only possible but likely. For clarity's sake, today's increase in refinancing is aiming at the future. On the background of this negative geopolitical external signals, is it possible that in the near future the central bank will revert to increasing the refinancing rate once again? In the press release that I read out for you that is covered, let me reiterate that it's not the geopolitical situation that may determine it, but if we see that in order to get to our inflation target that will be required, we'll go for it. Let me add an emphasis about being focused on the future. Our today's determination of the rate, and we communicated the same way in December 2020. We always balance our policy. Since we reviewed down the GDP estimates and expect a slowdown, this is also reflected in the interest rate. When the governor referred to the neutral rate, what matters here is that through our actions we of course see that the risks have increased and the inflation background will be higher. We shall not accelerate inflation through our actions in Armenia. Our monetary position is neutralized, not to accelerate it. This balancing between the demand and the inflation is done, all things considered. Concurrently with increased dollar exchange rate, certain banks propose to their clients, if they cash out more than 10,000 US, to inform them a week in advance, failing that they won't be able to do it. Reputable people in social media circulate ideas that lots of dollars have fled from the central bank to Russia, and the increase in the exchange rate is determined by that. Do we expect shortage of dollars in Armenia? What do these people say? They claim that lots of dollars have fled from the central banks to the Russian Federation, and the increased exchange rate is caused by that. No channel has any dollar left central bank for Russia. We have our balance, everything is accounted for. We do not have one system of accounting to bring it in and another system of accounting to take it out. This belongs to the genre of the absurd. As for the cash out and exchange rate, of course, alongside this tension, people and business entities have this desire to move from non-cash to cash means. So the question is whose cash is? If it's the drums of the Republic of Armenia, therefore essentially owned by the central bank, no issue there whatsoever. But we understand that it's the Federal Reserve System that owns the dollars, therefore that imposes certain restrictions in this situation in circulation or release of cash dollars. Nevertheless, to the tribute of our financial system, I shall acknowledge that our banks and the central bank have enough of cash reserves. And since in my previous statements I mentioned that at this point in time we do not see the need for any regulatory interference, the cash exists in the volume and amount which we consider to be adequate to the situation. So this concern in our vision will this concern will decrease alongside the developments of the situation. Mr. Gallistyan, you mentioned about exporters that may encounter issues in view of the decline of the Russian economy. There is a lot of discussion about diversifying exports. Foreign trade relations of Armenia have been hinged to one or two dimensions, whereas sanctions against Russia, we understand that they're not short-term, there may be long-term essentially. So in this respect, what does the central bank or the Armenian authorities have to do to diversify exports, and can it be done considering the goods we're exporting to Russia? This is the turf of the government and the Ministry of Economy. Let me refrain from answering because this is beyond our turf. Does the central bank intervene to stabilize the exchange rate? If yes, in what volumes starting March?
Yes, Eli, ենթատեքստով ու թվերով կամ ինչ որ տրամաբանված փորձեմ ձեր պատասխանել։
I'll try to answer using numbers. We didn't intervene. For starters, let me tell you why. I believe we have excellent public, not just good but excellent people who have been capable over years to learn and have proven through their behavior that they are reasonable and are on top of the situation. Let me expand further. You may remember that through 2020, when we were at war and in the wake thereof, certain outflow of financial means took place. During our meetings back then, I was intensively advising people not to remove their funds, not to break their deposits because of 5-10% of changing the forex, not to damage their finances. The significant part of the society listened to this, especially small depositors who were saving in drums. They did not make any uncontrolled movements. Getting back to the current situation when the forex also devalued significantly, this time we noticed that the volume of such uncontrolled movement was far less than even previous times, which comes to prove that people have hearkened to everything we have to convey to them. There is trust towards the central bank, which is what we appreciate, but they've also learned the ropes from the past experience we've been through together. One more clarifying question. Is there any data about the increase of card transactions since lots of Russian citizens arrived in Armenia? Yes, we have this data on a daily basis. We take it from the archive system. There is a significant increase, but I cannot pin it down. We have days when it was triple the average daily number of transactions by payment cards of non-residents. Other questions? So you have not observed any impulse dollar acquisitions or wires, far less than in the past we have noticed. Or you may recall that 4 or 5 years ago, whenever there was 20 drums devaluation of drum, everyone was focusing on 20 drums devaluation of the forex, whereas we had twice more of a devaluation of the exchange rate, and I cannot claim that the natural persons who are the most sensitive to this, we can't claim they change their behavior People are calmly on top of the situation and they've taken their decisions respectively. Other questions? Thank you.